In Madorica Real Estate, you take on the mantle of an estate agent in an exceptionally haunted district of Japan. It is your job to discover magic spells in order to explore buildings and ultimately exorcise the demons within them so that you can sell them through your agency. Madorica is a puzzle game. In form, it's one of the purest puzzle games out there, shirking platforming, shooting, or even movement in favour of a laser-sharp focus on ingenious puzzle design that never stops exploring or pushing the boundaries of its medium. This is the first episode in a brand new series called Lesson Learned, where we take a look at games to see what lesson we can learn as game designers ourselves. And in this first episode, we'll ask the question, what lesson can we learn from Madorica Real Estate? Madorica is a Japanese puzzle game by Gift10 Industry. Gift10 is primarily a two-man team, about as indie as they come, and with limited people comes limited resources. Madorica embraces this, and it thrives on a minimalistic approach to the game world in terms of art and programmed systems, but where things get interesting is that to fill in the gaps, Madorica Real Estate also comes with a set of printable documents. Thematically it really works because these printouts are blueprints of the buildings that you explore, something you might actually have as an estate agent. What's great is that they don't feel like a gimmick, and they don't feel like a shortcut to reduce the amount of work required on the video game itself. The blueprints really work in their own right, and they're justified by being used in interesting ways that could only be done on paper. The buildings in Madorica are mysterious, and neither the game nor the blueprints on their own give you the whole picture. You don't have the full set of information about the space that you're exploring in either of the two media. But by combining them, you can begin to piece things together and learn new things about the space that you're in. And a lot of the puzzles exist within this space, in this connecting of the blueprints and the game. Now, earlier I alluded to there being no movement in this game. Or at least there's no walking in this game. You can move from room to room, but you do so by casting magic spells that essentially teleport you from one room to the next. Visually and spatially, there is no way to connect these two rooms in your head, since you have not walked from room to room via a door. Nor can you ever see other rooms from your current spot, as there are no windows or open doors. Solving many of the puzzles in Madorica requires doing something that in almost any other game would come easily and naturally as you explore the space, and that is to understand the layout of the building. Ordinarily, you can simply rely on memory and a sense of direction to do this for you. Humans are naturally built to internally model and track the space that you're in, but in Madorica this is impossible as there is no frame of reference linking the rooms spatially, except the blueprints. Amongst other clues and puzzle-related information, the blueprints are your map. Now, a map is only as useful as it is accurate, and its usefulness is limited unless you know where you are on the map, and Madorica doesn't make things easy on you. It requires you to solve puzzles in order to build an accurate map and to discover where in that map you are at any given time. You have to learn about the building to be able to exorcise the ghosts inside, and learning about that building has to be earned. If there's one lesson to take away from Madorica Real Estate, I think this is it: turning limitation on its head. How do you make a 3D first-person game interesting if you can't walk around? It seems like a difficult task, but Madorica Real Estate has done it. As a game developer, try and think of limitation as not something that restricts you, but something that you can dig into to actually find a new interesting facet and mechanic for your game. Superficially, limitation can sound like a negative, but without limitation, there is no game. Games are based on rules, and rules are limitations. When you learn to play a game, you're learning how to abide by the rules. If someone released an amazing new game that you could do anything you wanted in, absolutely anything, with no limits, can you even really consider that a game anymore? You could call it a simulator, I suppose, but when you've got something with no rules, a true sandbox experience, it really starts to move away from what we could recognisably call a game. Your game is going to have limitations, and they come from several sources, the first of which is artificial rules and limitations that you decide upon as a designer. If you're coming up with an idea for a game, you're going to add rules. That's, like I said, what makes it a game. If you've decided you're going to make a platformer, chances are you don't want the player to be able to just move anywhere they want, whenever they want, because that's probably going to remove any semblance of a challenge from your game. So you're going to add limitations. You're going to limit how the player can move. So that's the first kind of limitation, the one that you decide upon to add to the game. But the second kind of limitation is what you're limited by in terms of your skill and your resources as a game maker. Indie studios are of course much more limited in what they can do as compared with a big studio. But if that first kind of limitation, the rules that we control, if they are there to make the game more fun, then why not take the limitations out of our control and also use those to make our game more fun? Use the limitations that are there because of our resources or our time or our skill, and use those to our advantage. We're going to look at 2 examples of games that have done something like this. First off, a famous example. Silent Hill for the PlayStation 1 made liberal use of fog on their level. They didn't want to have to draw things that were that far away, because the longer your draw distance, the more you have to render off in the background, and the PlayStation simply couldn't handle that. It was a hardware limitation that they got around by just hiding things far away in the fog. But ultimately that fog made the game really creepy and added a lot of atmosphere to the Silent Hill games, and even the later titles make use of the same fog, even though they wouldn't necessarily have to, because they could render those things far away given the new hardware. And how about a newer title, the Talos Principle? It's a first-person 3D platforming puzzle game, and there are plentiful situations in the Talos Principle where you can get yourself out of bounds, out of the map. Now usually, games do their absolute best to stop the player leaving the map. They will add invisible walls or simply make the geometry too high for you to be able to jump over and out. But the level design in the Talos Principle is very busy, there are props around, and you can jump quite high. You can also move around things that you can then jump on top of, so you can make your own towers out of some of the items around the map. Making the maps impossible to leave in the Talos Principle would be a fairly difficult task, and so the developers simply didn't try. Instead, the developers made the out-of-bounds areas of the game freely accessible to any player willing to try. With good observational skills, or good platforming skills, if you were willing to explore and probe the game and try and break it, you could find yourself out of the map, and the developers counted on that happening. They would actually hide secrets and rewards for your exploration outside of the game bounds. Not only does this make things easier on the developer, not having to account for every eventuality, every possible way the player could leave the map on a large, busy level full of geometry and movable platforms, but it also improved the game as a whole because it contributes to the story. In the Talos Principle, you are in a faltering, breaking simulation, and being able to get out of bounds enforces this idea that you're glitching this broken simulation. Overall, in these 2 examples, the simplest answer was the one that best contributed to the end quality of the game. Gaining utility from the lesson of this episode means asking yourself, as a game developer, what are your limitations? What can't you do? And then it means taking those limitations and carving out a fun new aspect of your game, coming up with a new mechanic based on the limitation that you are forced to conform to. Madorica Real Estate teaches us to see the limitations of the rules of a game and the limitations of real life and the game-making process as one and the same thing. So that answers the question we began with. That is the lesson learned from Madorica Real Estate, working within your limitations and using them to your advantage. But I want to finish up by just coming back to Madorica and a few final words on it. The version that I played several months ago was the Nintendo Switch version of Madorica, very kindly sent to me by the development team, Gift10 Industries. But as of the release of this video, the Steam version of Madorica Real Estate is being released tomorrow. What's interesting is that, just like the paper manuals that the game relies on, the Nintendo Switch is also an integral part of a lot of the puzzles, which means that releasing the game for the PC is going to require an overhaul of some of the puzzles. I imagine there's going to be a whole new slew of content that replaces some of the specific Nintendo Switch puzzles that were in the original game, so it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. Madorica Real Estate is a game I highly recommend that you pick up, if you're a puzzle game enthusiast, and especially if you like puzzle books and escape games and that kind of format. It's a game that succeeds in turning a first-person experience where you can't even move into a fun game by presenting you with puzzle after puzzle that is fun and interesting and surprising and satisfying to solve. Thank you for joining me on this, the inaugural episode of Lesson Learned. Next time we'll be taking a look at another game with paper printouts, keep talking and nobody explodes, and asking the question, what lesson can we learn?